On the night of the 12th of January, the entire valley went dark, except for one farm. 3 white turbines spun above a glowing barn, while every other homestead sat frozen and black. But to understand how that farm survived, you have to go back 6 months. Michael Reeves walked into the bank and withdrew every cent he had saved.
$40,000. That's all of it. No turning back now.
The plan had been brewing ever since the winter. His father's dairy herd froze to death during a blackout.
I was 12 when the power failed. Dad never recovered. I won't be helpless.
He ordered turbine kits, batteries, inverters, everything needed to cut the cord. When the flatbed truck arrived with the first blades, his neighbors laughed from the road. Michael didn't laugh back. He grabbed his wrench and started assembly, the cold wind already biting. A week later, Michael pushed open the door of the Valley Diner, frost still in his hair. The 4 men in the corner booth looked up. Donald Harker spoke loud enough for the whole room.
Well, if it isn't the Wind Boy, still trying to power a farm with a fan.
Probably be cheaper to just burn his money. Goes whoosh just the same.
Laughter filled the diner. Michael ordered coffee and stared straight ahead.
Let them laugh. They don't know what I am building.
When he left, he paused at the door, pulling his collar up. Donald's voice carried from the booth.
I am telling you, Bev, someone's got to stop that nonsense. I'll bring an ordinance to the commission. Shut his little science project down.
Just be careful, Don. He's not hurting anyone.
Outside, Michael's jaw tightened. He'd heard enough. Michael didn't let the diner laughter slow him down. He went back to the frozen field and tightened the next bolt. For 8 weeks, he labored alone, hoisting blades into the winter sky, threading cable through the snow.
I won't let the cold take this farm, not like it took Dad.
Inside the barn, he wired a bank of 48 batteries, their charge lights glowing amber in the dark. On the day he threw the main switch, his hands trembled. The green lights flickered, then held steady. The overheads buzzed and flared to life.
It works. The farm is its own power now.
He stepped outside and looked up at the 3 white blades beginning to turn. For the first time in months, he allowed himself a tired half-smile. Then the first snowflakes of the season landed on his shoulder. Winter was coming. 2 weeks after the turbines went live, a certified envelope landed on Michael's kitchen table. The letter read, Ordinance 24-09. Any residential wind turbine exceeding 10 feet must hold an industrial-grade permit.
10 feet? Every turbine I built is 30. This isn't a rule. It's a death warrant.
Michael drove to the county office, where Donald Harker sat behind a frosted glass partition, arms crossed.
You swore you'd stop my project. This ordinance proves it.
The commission voted on public safety. Son, nothing personal.
But the smirk on Donald's face was as personal as a signature on a foreclosure.
If I can't fight this, I lose everything. There has to be a loophole.
He emptied his checking account, $3,000, and hired a county lawyer who spotted the flaw. Improper public notice. Michael filed his appeal in December. Outside the courthouse, the sky turned iron gray and a blizzard warning blinked on the local radio. On a bitter January morning, Michael walked into the county hearing room in a borrowed blazer, his hands ice cold.
Don't let them see how scared I am. Just tell the truth. I built those turbines to keep my farm alive. My father lost everything to a blackout.
Donald's attorney called the turbines a public hazard, waving the ordinance like a threat. But Michael's lawyer pointed to the public notice. It had run for only 9 days, not 14. The 3 commissioners conferred for 4 minutes. Then the chairwoman declared the ordinance invalid due to insufficient notice.
I won, on a technicality, but I know Donald will try again.
She added, the county is free to correct the error and refile. Outside, his lawyer pulled him aside and warned that Donald would refile the moment he could. At the back of the room, Donald Harker's face was stone, but his knuckles were white against the railing. After the hearing, Michael ignored the handful of neighbors who suddenly nodded at the feed store. He kept his head down. In his barn, He lined the shelves with canned soup, bags of rice, and 12 blue fuel jugs, the last of his cash.
No more relying on the grid. Not for food, not for heat.
One windless afternoon, he stood in the farmyard, eyes on the low clouds, the air pressed in, heavy and wrong.
The old timers say the quiet before a big storm is a warning.
That evening, Donald Harker sat in the Valley Diner, stabbing at his pie with a fork.
Reeves won on a technicality. When the snow melts, I'll bring a new ordinance that sticks.
You can't blame him for being prepared, Don. Winter's coming in hard this year. I can feel it in my bones.
Michael didn't hear them. He was outside in the fading light, tightening the last clamp on the turbine base. The wind picked up suddenly, and his turbines began their low, constant hum. Winter was knocking. The weather radio crackled at dawn. Ice storm warning in effect. Expect widespread power outages. Michael spent the morning walking his system. Turbine mounts, battery cables, the backup generator, tight and ready.
Everything's topped off. If the grid goes, this farm won't even blink.
By noon, freezing rain began to fall, glassing over every branch and wire in the valley. At dusk, a transformer exploded on the county road. A blue flash, then silence. One by one, the farmhouse windows across the valley flickered and went dark, but Michael's farm held its glow. The yellow lights steady, the turbines turning through the ice. He stood at his kitchen window, watching the darkness spread like a rising tide.
I built this for a night like this. It works.
In the barn, the battery gauge held steady. Green lights, no flicker. By morning, the ice had glazed the world, but Michael's turbines still turned, shedding shards into the wind. As he checked the cows, a pounding shook the barn door. A desperate, frozen fist that didn't stop.
Reeves, please. My kids are freezing. Your lights were on. Please.
Ray. The one who called me Wind Boy loudest, right beside Donald. And now he's here, with his children turning blue.
Michael didn't hesitate. He swung the door wide and motioned them inside. The girl couldn't stop shivering. The boy's eyelids were heavy with cold.
Get by the heater. Take these blankets. I'll check on you in a minute.
Ray tried to speak, but his voice broke halfway through.
I am sorry. I am so sorry. I didn't know where else to go.
Outside, the storm howled. Inside, the barn's warmth wrapped around the first of many. The refuge had begun. By the third evening, the barn held 27 people. Families, widows, and old men who had once laughed at his turbines. Bev arrived with 3 seniors from town. She looked at Michael and said, "We had nowhere else." Michael turned the dairy corner into a kitchen, heating soup on a propane stove, his eyes ringed with exhaustion. The children warmed near the heater, their cheeks pink now. The old men stared at the spinning turbines outside with shame. An elderly man's oxygen compressor stuttered. The battery wall couldn't hold much more. Michael rerouted the cables himself.
If this fails, his lungs go. I can't let him die.
The machine hummed back to life. The man's chest rose and fell. A collective breath released.
That man built this place so his father's herd wouldn't freeze, and now he's saving every life in this valley.
No one called him Wind Boy anymore. They called him Michael. Outside, the turbines kept turning. Their steady rhythm, a promise the grid had broken. On the 6th day, as the wind screamed outside, a new knock came, not desperate, but insistent.
Reeves, I am here in my capacity as commissioner. Open this door.
You've got nerve, Harker. You tried to put him out of business, and now you want his heat.
Enough. Let him in. This isn't the time for old scores.
Michael pointed Donald to a corner by the drafty door. Donald took it without a word. Before anyone could speak, a sharp crack echoed through the barn. The battery monitor flashed red.
Turbine 1. The blade must have cracked. Without it, the batteries die.
He grabbed his harness and climbed into the blizzard. Ice sliced his face as he scaled the tower. His foot slipped on a rung. For a heartbeat, he dangled by one glove. Below, The barn was silent. Then the red light blinked green. He'd done it. By the 12th day, the food shelves were nearly bare. Michael counted the cans. Enough for 10, not 30.
3 days of fuel left if we ration. I have to find more, or people die. I've got one thing left worth anything. My grandfather's '56 Ford. There's a man with supplies 2 miles out. I am selling it.
Michael, that truck's been in your family longer than you've been alive. You can't.
It's a truck. These are people.
A stranger arrived on a sled, hauling food and propane. Michael signed the title with a frozen hand, and the truck was gone. He handed a can of beans to a young girl, her fingers wrapped around it like gold. Across the barn, Donald Harker still sat apart, untouched by the warmth he'd tried to extinguish.
A little girl just handed me her blanket. Her eyes weren't angry. They were just sad.
Donald's hand trembled as he took it. For the first time, something in his eyes cracked. On the 15th day, the battery gauge slipped into the red. A warning alarm beeped, steady and sharp.
If I cut the house, we keep the barn warm. The medical gear stays on. It's the only move.
He threw the breakers to his own home. The windows went black. The barn stayed warm. He slept in the barn corner with the others, a thin blanket around his shoulders, shivering between checks on the inverter. At 3 a.m., a scuffling sound near the fuel cans yanked him awake. A man, one of the refugees, clutched a gas can, palms white.
You don't have to steal. If you need it for the group, take it.
The man's legs buckled. He wept into his hands, confession spilling he'd planned to sell it for insulin. Michael put the can back in his hands. Share it, that's all. The barn fell quiet, not with fear, but with something else. By morning, the battery gauge had dropped another 3%. The system was bleeding, but the barn was quiet. No one had left, and the man who'd almost stolen now sat stoking the stove for everyone. Donald had started scrubbing pots in the barn, head down, saying nothing to anyone who approached. He overheard Bev whisper to Ray, if Michael hadn't won that appeal, this barn would be dark and everyone would be dark, and everyone would be dead. That ordinance was a bullet aimed at us all.
The truth of it sat like ice in my chest, and I couldn't breathe for a moment. I nearly killed them all.
That night, Donald found Michael alone by the battery bank, checking the gauge in the dim light.
I put that ordinance through because I didn't like you, not for safety. It was personal. It was wrong.
Michael listened, his face unreadable. He let the silence stretch before he spoke.
We'll settle it after.
Donald's shoulders dropped. He nodded once, not meeting Michael's eyes, and turned to walk back to his corner. Outside, the wind rose and the turbines began to hum louder than before. As if the earth itself was acknowledging something, the sound filled the barn like a second heartbeat, steady and strong. And for the first time in days, the battery gauge held its charge. The deep freeze arrived on the 21st day, a -20 grip that turned every exhale into ice. The battery gauge dipped lower each hour. Michael gathered the group by the stove and spoke with a calm that felt heavier than shouting.
We have to shed more load. The dairy parlor heater drains too much. I am cutting it.
But that's your milk contract for the year. If the cows stop producing...
Better a lost contract than lost people.
He flipped the breaker. The parlor went cold. The cows were led into the barn's far corner, their lowing joining the crowded room. A child cried in his mother's arms, and the sound cut through every soul in the barn. Donald stood apart, watching Michael's back. For once, the commissioner's face held no judgment.
Sold the truck, cut the parlor, drained the batteries. There's nothing left to give except myself.
But he didn't stop. He checked every blanket, every thermostat, and then went into the frozen night to check the turbines once more. In the deepest hour of the 22nd night, a child's cough turned wet and dangerous. The mother's cry cut through the barn. Michael saw the boy's lips turning blue, his chest heaving.
If I use the last generator for the nebulizer, there's no backup. But the boy is dying.
He wheeled out the generator, ripped the cord, and plugged the nebulizer in. The compressor hummed, and the boy's breathing eased. But as the boy drifted to sleep, the wind outside stopped. The turbine slowed, then fell completely silent. The battery gauge dropped 5%, 3-0. The lights flickered once, then the barn plunged into absolute darkness. People grabbed one another in the black. A child whimpered. Michael stood still, listening for a breath that didn't come.
Not tonight. Not like Dad, please.
Then, just before dawn, a low hum. The turbines began to spin. The lights flickered, then held steady. The barn exhaled as one. Day 23 had dawned by the 27th day. Michael opened the last sealed bin of rice. The pot held only cloudy water and a thin film of grain.
My hunting cabin's 4 miles north. It's got canned meat, beans, a whole pantry. I'll go.
Number. The drifts are chest deep. You'd freeze before you got halfway.
I'm not asking, Reeves. I'm telling you I will.
He took 2 volunteers and vanished into the snowmelt fog. For 6 hours, the barn was silent, listening to the wind.
If he dies out there, it's on me now.
Then the door scraped open. Donald fell through, dragging a duffel of canned goods, his beard solid ice.
You actually did it, Harker.
Ray clasped Donald's hand, the first time any of them had. The barn stirred with reluctant relief. Michael said nothing, but his eyes followed Donald with something harder than forgiveness. On the 30th morning, a crackle from the portable radio cut through the barn. Power is being restored. Cheers erupted. Families pressed Michael's hand. Women hugged him. Children stared at his tired face. As they packed, Michael retreated to a corner with a worn spiral notebook. His pen moved down the page, adding numbers. When the last duffel was zipped, Donald Harker stepped toward him, cap in hand.
I was wrong about you. I came to thank you.
You were wrong, but you don't get a thank you.
Michael tore a page from the notebook and held it up. The circled total read, $38,000.
That's every meal, every kilowatt, every gallon of fuel I poured into this valley. Everyone else is forgiven. You'll pay every cent.
Donald's hand trembled as he took the bill. His mouth opened, but no words came. Around them, the barn had gone still. Not a single voice rose to defend the commissioner. Donald stared at the figure on the paper as if it was a sentence. His hands began to shake.
I can't. That's more than I make in a year.
You had plenty for lawyers. 38,000 is the generator I burned to save a child's life. The truck I sold to feed your neighbors.
He remembered the night the commission voted, the smug look on Harker's face as he gavelled the ordinance forward.
If that ordinance had stood, there wouldn't be a single person in this barn standing to thank you. You'd be presiding over a cemetery.
He thought of the violation notice that had arrived in his mailbox and the appeal that nearly broke him, and the day he won, on a technicality, only to hear Donald vow to refile. He'd been fighting ever since. Ray Thompson stood with the others, arms crossed. No one spoke for the commissioner. They just watched.
You don't get a thank you. You get a bill, and you will pay it.
I'll pay it. Every cent.
Donald turned without another word and walked out of the barn. The bill crumpled in his pocket. The last of the families followed, shouldering packs, casting long glances back at Michael.
We owe you more than we can ever repay. Whatever you need, lumber, labor, a hot meal, you call us.
Thank you, Ray.
When the farmyard was empty, he walked to the nearest turbine and laid his palm against the cold, spinning blade.
All that noise they made. And in the end, the only sound that mattered was this.
The blade hummed under his hand, the vibration traveling up his arm like a pulse. The sunset broke through the clouds, painting the snow in gold and amber. For the first time in 30 days, he let his shoulders drop. The weight wasn't gone. The debt would take years to recover. But something inside him had shifted. A letter arrived in early March, a cashier's check from Donald Harker, with no note, the first payment. He stared at it for a long moment, then set it aside and went back to repairing the dairy parlor. 2 weeks later, the Grange Hall glowed with candlelight. The whole valley had gathered for a gratitude dinner.
Folks, I said plenty of stupid things about Michael Reeves, but when the power died, his light stayed on, and he saved my children. To Michael, who kept our families warm.
Michael stood slowly, not used to being the center of a grateful room. He looked down at his calloused hands before speaking.
The wind didn't choose sides. Neither did I.
The applause that followed wasn't for a hero. It was for a neighbor who'd done the hard thing. Afterward, Bev poured him a fresh cup of coffee and didn't say a word. She didn't need to. That night, Michael drove home to a farm that glowed with its own light, a beacon no one would ever mock again. One spring evening, Michael walked the greening fields, the soil soft under his boots. He stopped at a small fenced grave on the hill, his father's. From his pocket, he took a small fragment of a turbine blade. Smoothed by the storm, he set it against the headstone, where the grass had worn thin.
We made it, Dad.
He walked a few more steps and sat on the hillside, looking out over the farm. The sun sank behind the turbines, turning the blades into 3 gold crosses. For the first time, Michael didn't feel the weight of the past on his shoulders. The farmhouse windows came to life as the stars emerged. One bright point in the dark valley. The wind had carried him here, and the wind would carry on. Spring gave way to summer, and sunflowers turned their heads toward the spinning blades. By autumn, the harvest was strong, and the dairy barn was full. On a distant hill, where once there was only doubt, a neighbor had raised a small turbine of his own. Soon, another followed, and another. The valley that once mocked was now listening. They laughed when he built a wind-powered farm, but when the grid crashed for 30 days, only his lights stayed on, and something else lit up that couldn't be measured in kilowatts. The sign at the gate read, Reeves Wind Farm. It was never about the wind. It was about never being helpless again. For Michael, for the valley, and for everyone who ever felt the cold, the turbines kept spinning.